third chapter. We thank you, O God, for providing your word for us and giving us a place and an opportunity to study your word. We bless you and we honor you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, um, years ago, as a young believer, I went to um, one of my cousins that lived in Lincoln Heights was murdered, and the church um, was the church where his funeral was Glendale Baptist Church. And Glendale Baptist Church eventually became the sanctuary and is now the sanctuary at Kingdom Square. But then it was Pastor Macklin, now Bishop Macklin. And during my cousin's funeral, uh, I was a young believer, and so I didn't have any clue why this preacher was going so hard at my cousin's funeral. But he said at my cousin's funeral that the way you live is the way you die. And my cousin apparently had lived a violent life, and he lived a violent death. And he didn't spare any punches at that funeral. His girlfriend was there pulling on the body like she was going to pull it out. And he talked about in his eulogy how you don't have hope, and that's why you're trying to pull bodies out of caskets and all that. It was like whatever he saw, he said it. Um, and it's just helped me now to think about why what I didn't understand then had some relevancy to it that now, many, many years later, I can kind of understand what was going on. So we got a lot to cover. We're going to try to cover these 19 verses tonight, but I do want us to deal with for a second. So y'all be prepared to move towards mics if you have to, because I want us to deal with this idea of um, reaping and sowing in the sense of that if we live in a certain way, we live a certain lifestyle, we are guilty of doing certain things, how that how does that manifest? What are the challenges of doing that? And so if um, what do we expect to come if we live violent lives? What has been your experience? Y'all been around for a while, so we'll go out violently. All right.
I know that when we live by the sword, we die by the sword.
Okay.
So if I'm out there living a street life, I'm doing harm to people, more than likely that harm is going to come back to me.
All right. I like that. Sister Cheek, we need you to move towards a mic because they won't be able to hear you on the internet.
Not only will you live, you go out a violent life, it also can affect your family.
Yes,
the way you live.
it definitely will affect your family. Um, my my cousin often says, which I was definitely reminded of, um, that he didn't only go to prison, I went to prison too. Because everywhere that he had to go to prison, I had to go to see him. So when they made him go to Pennsylvania, I had to go to Pennsylvania. When they made him go to South Carolina, I had to go to South Carolina. When they made him go to Jonesville, Virginia, I had to go to Jonesville, Virginia. When they sent him to Edgefield and then to Bennettsville and then to this place and to that place, and they said, oh, we really gonna punish you. We're gonna send you all the way to Lompoc, California. Guess what? If I wanted to see him, I had to go all the way to Lompoc, California. So they were punishing him, but the truth is they were what? Punishing me too. I remember being down Lorton, and I don't know if it was my brother or my blood brother or my nephew, and I just remember talking to one of them guards and saying, I don't know who you talking to, but I'm not a prisoner. I'm here to visit a prisoner. And the way you talking to me, I don't know what you doing, but I'm not going for all that. I came here to see somebody. And if you used to talking to them that way, that might be acceptable, but um, it ain't acceptable for you to be talking to me. I didn't do anything to you. Um, but that's another one of those things that when we do, um, here's the way that I heard it explained. I'm going to go off of what Deacon Winchester said. Here's the way that I was explained. There's a circle that people run in, and there are other circles that other people run in, and you choose which circle you run in. So you can't choose to run in this circle where everything goes and then think that you don't get what goes with running in that circle. And sometimes you choose the right circle and those circles collide every once in a while. But for the most part, when you run in the right circles, you get the right stuff. When you run in the wrong circles and you make up your mind that that's the circle that you want to run in, you get what comes with running in that circle, right? And I just remember somebody saying, if you watch when the really bad stuff happens in the city, it's after 10 o'clock at night. So why you want to be out in that circle, right? Because if you're running in the right circle, you don't have any reason to be out at 11 o'clock, right? You ain't got no reason to be out at 2 o'clock in the morning if you're running the right lifestyle. Now that I'm grown and I can do whatever I want to, I don't have any reason to be out the house after 10 o'clock at night. I don't really come home except for maybe leaving here where I'm coming home after 9 o'clock at night, right? But if I'm out there at 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, doing whatever it is, there's a certain element that goes with that lifestyle, right? And I'm making a major mistake if I think I'm going to run in those circles, but I'm not going to get what come to people that run in those circles, right? I'm going to run around with a 44 in my waist because I'm bad enough to put a 44 in my waist. But I'm not going to get what comes around to people who run around with 44s. So you can do that if you want to, but it's an admission that there's some stuff that comes with this. And what I don't get to do, life doesn't afford me to do, is to say, I'm going to run around in this world, but I'm not accepting the consequences of the decision that I made to run around in this world, right? I think that's really what's happening with us, with contraceptives, with abortion, and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and then when the consequences of me doing what I want to do come up, I'm going to just have an abortion. Because I don't want to deal with the consequences of it. I made that decision. But one of the consequences of doing whatever I want to do is I might get pregnant. Right? Okay. So, E, you had your hand up, and then we're going to jump in our lesson. Your feedback, I can hear you, Dr. Wright.
I wanted to say a lot of times people do things and they don't think about what you say, the consequences of their actions.
Right.
Like they don't think about the effect that it might have on other people in their family.
Right.
That goes with it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. There's definitely because right now, so there was a time when folks had an idea of there's a right way to do wrong. You know, you're gonna do wrong, but there is, at least when there was some decency, you could do wrong and there was a way that you did wrong, right? You don't, like when we were little boys, if they were messing up, they would tell you, get from around here. If you tried to hang around too much, they took your ball, they kicked it over the fence, like, get from around here. You too little to be around here. Now, they don't chase the little boys away. They entice them to do what they're doing. But back then, they said, we don't want to mess you up. We're doing wrong. You're young. Get away from here. There was a right way to do it. Even over Barry Farm, as bad as Barry Farm is known to be, There is a track record that nothing happens within 100 yards of the basketball court. You don't mess up down by the basketball court. You do what you do, but don't go down by them basketball courts, because that's a safe place. We do wrong. Let me make no doubt about it. We do wrong, but we don't do wrong in certain places, right? There was a certain thing that you just didn't do. Now, it just kind of like, whatever. We're going to do whatever we're going to do. Yeah. And so I think that's, but I don't think today we recognize that. And I think what chapter 3 shows us is that there are consequences. There are consequences. You can do what you want to do, yes.
I was just going to add, you know, in the older days, they had what was considered as a code,
Right,
street code. But not only that, you also was brought up with a level of respect.
right,
If somebody's parent was walking down the street, you would stop whatever you was doing,
right,
and you would pick back up once they left.
right.
And
Yeah.
you know, the other thing is the attitude that we had was, I'm not hurting nobody but myself.
Right.
You don't realize it was the trickle down effect
Oh, yeah.
of what you were doing that
Yeah.
affected your family and everybody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely hurting other people. I do remember as a little boy out making mischievous little boy stuff and being 12, 13 years old, maybe 14, and that old lady on the cane just stopping and saying, y'all ought to be shaming yourself. And we shut up. And she kept on going about her way. But nobody said, old lady, be quiet. There was just, like, if somebody checked you, you shut your mouth. Right. You didn't have to worry about fighting them on the bus or on the train or none of that. You got, an old person checked you, you took it. Yeah. I ain't scared of them, though. I tell them, I'm trying to eat my dinner, and you keep cussing every other word, and I didn't come in here to hear you cuss every other word. Me and my wife were out at dinner earlier this year, and the dude cussing at the table next to me. Man, me and my wife trying to enjoy dinner. You cussing every other word, I can't enjoy my dinner. Then the next dude said, what did he say to you? He said, he told me to stop cussing. And they looked at him, and I'm looking at them like, I said what I said. Now, I know there's a way to do that. I didn't say it across the room. I got in his ear. So he heard what I said. I'm not trying to bust you out. I'm trying to have dinner with my wife, and I don't want to hear you cussing every other word. All right. So let's look at this. He starts off this, or if you're doing notes on this, the overall theme is the destruction of Nineveh is deserved. They deserve what comes to them. From verse 1 through 7, it is violence and deceit result in shame. So verses 1 through 7, the subpart of the destruction of Nineveh is deserved from verse 1 through 7. If you're graphing this or you're kind of laying this out in an outline, verse 1 through 7, violence and deceit result in shame. Verse 8 through 11, we're going to see what Assyria has done to others is being done to them. So 1 through 7 is violence and deceit result in shame. 8 through 11 is what Assyria did to others, is done to them. And then verses 12 through 19 is useless defense efforts. So Assyria has some defense efforts, but they're useless. All right, so he starts off this with woe to the city of blood. You will find references to woe to the city of blood in verse 1. You will find references to that in 2 Kings 18, 28, and 32. He uses that same language. Now, what is significant is whenever you find woes in Scripture, it is a warning. It's a judgment. It is significant that there is something coming towards you. Jesus uses woe, Isaiah uses woe, but in fact, in Isaiah chapter 6, when he sees the Lord high and lifted up, Isaiah says, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips." Woe is that warning of you need to pump your brakes. You need to be aware that there's a judgment that's going to be coming towards you. So he says, "Woe to the city of blood." And again, 2 Kings chapter 18 helps you to see that he uses that same terminology, woe to the city of blood. Now, these Assyrians are known for being ruthless people. They didn't just kill, they didn't just rob, they didn't just steal, they did it and they were ruthless. So God used them to punish Israel, but now he's going to use the Medes and the Persians to punish them. Because while God was using them, he's now going to use somebody else to be the punishment towards them. So here is, as we look from verses down 1 through 11, he's going to give us the reasons for why they are going to be punished. Look at this. He says, "Woe to the city of blood." So they are known for the treachery and the amount of bloodshed that they are responsible for. Look at this. He describes them as the city of blood. He says, full of lies and full of plunder, and never without victims. You never took things without victimizing people. Now, it's important for us because there are some, even within ministry, who run like the church mafia. They're the church gangsters. And it's important, even when we're in the kingdom, to recognize that if I live by the sword, I'm going to die by it. If I run with a life of violence, if I run with a life of being an advantage taker, that's going to come back to me. My brother with bad diction would remind me, "Frank, you do not want to be a vantage taker. You don't want to be an advantage taker." He didn't say advantage, it was vantage taker. You don't want to be a vantage taker. He said when you're a vantage taker, people become scared of you. And when you're in the inner city, people always hurt people that they're scared of. Don't have people scared of you. You want them to respect you, but you don't want them scared of you because they're going to hurt you if they're scared of you. If they're scared of you, they're going to get you first. Leave people alone. Don't be that guy who's the bully on the block. You don't want to be him. You want them to say, "I'm going to leave him alone. I'm not going to mess with him." But you don't want to be the guy that's running around taking advantage of people and pushing on people and all that stuff. Don't be that guy. And I'm warning you tonight, you don't want to be that person in the ministry. You don't want to be the person who's always running over people. You don't want to be that person who's always violating people. Having respect by people, that's one thing. Being the person who's feared, that's not a good place to be in. If for nothing else, God is going to deal with me. Forget what everybody else might do to me. I don't want to be that person who's the bully at the church, who's the bully in the ministry, because God deals with those people. Now notice this, he calls them out for what they've been doing. He says to them in verse 1, "You're full of lies." Now you've been doing it for a long time, but you're full of lies. You're full of plunder. You're never without victims. So he is directly addressing the people of Nineveh or the Assyrians for the amount of bloodshed that they did. You were always killing people. We're going to see this a little later. I'm going to actually take you to a verse in another one of the books. But I do want you all to know that God is not pleased with them for them doing the crazy stuff that they were doing. He said the crack of whips in verse 2 and the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, and jolting chariots, that's what's coming. And that's what they always did. But amazingly, this is why I'm saying we need to be careful about what we do, because the very thing, as we talked about in chapter 1 and chapter 2, the very thing that they did in perpetrating that towards other people is exactly what's coming on them. Right? You remember that song, if you dig one ditch, you better dig two, because the one you set just may be for you. Be careful, right? Because sometimes you build gallows, but the person that you intended for the gallows to hang is not going to be who gets hung on the gallows. Be very careful about plotting and scheming against people, particularly people that God has his hand of covering on. So look at verse 3. He says, charging cavalry, flashing swords, and glittering spears. This is the imagery. Look at this imagery also in verse 3. He says, many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over corpses. That's what y'all did. You didn't just kill, you killed. You ran roughshod over people. Right? And he says, all because of the wanton lust of a harlot. So I'm in verse 3. Verse 3 and then verse 4. He says, all because of wanton lust of harlot, alluring the mistress of sorceries, who enslaved nations by her prostitution and people by her witchcraft. Y'all were treacherous, and you used not only the treachery, but you even used witchcraft in what you were doing. So you caused all these casualties. So there are some people, and the Assyrians were guilty of this. They were going to get ahead, and they didn't care what they needed to do to get ahead. And there's some folks that's like that. I'm going to get it. And I'm going to step on whoever I need to step on in order to get it. And if you get hurt while I'm getting what I got to get, too bad. Yeah, but I'm going to get it. Now, I understand that in corporate America. I understand that outside the kingdom. What I don't understand is when you want it and you're going to do all of that in the kingdom. How are you just going to walk over people in the church? How are you going to talk bad about folks in order to get whatever it is you want? I don't understand that. I was talking to Minister Calloway the other day. It might have been even today. And I said, I've never had a problem minding my business in the ministry. When something is going on in somebody else's ministry, that ain't my business. As a young preacher, they were always trying to get me to have an opinion about what Pastor Shaw was doing. I don't have no opinion. Not one that I'm going to share with you. Because as a young preacher, I had an opinion. I didn't understand what he was doing. But I also understood, and I understand even more now, that as a 28 or a 29-year-old preacher, I had no reason to open my mouth about what he was doing. And there's some folks now, all you got to do is give them any little bit of an opportunity, and they are ready to share their opinion. Can't balance their own checkbook, but they're ready to share an opinion with you. Here, the church has $1 million budget. They can't regulate $50,000 a year, but they're ready to tell you how to run $1 million budget. You get what I'm saying? They can't run their one-bedroom apartment, but they want to tell you how to run all the church's responsibilities. I'm learning, and this is what I learned very early: mind your business when it comes to ministry, right? But if I got to get ahead by stepping on people, that's a problem. But that's what people do. And sometimes they deal with stuff and you have to come clean it up. You didn't spill it. You didn't put the trash there. You didn't make the mess. But because you're leadership, you got to clean it up. Notice this. He says, all because of wanton lust of harlot. Now, whenever you see, particularly in the Old Testament, Paul does it too in the New Testament, that they're talking about a harlot, they're talking about prostitution, as he does in verse 4. He is talking about, for the most part, either idolatry or unfaithfulness to God. God accuses his people of playing the role of a whore when they're unfaithful to him. It's this connotation of when a husband and a wife vow to be with one another, you are making a vow that I give all of me to you for the rest of my life, and I give none of me to anyone else. Right? So the bride who then turns around and has relations with somebody other than her husband, the scriptures describe that as a whore. God describes someone who is his bride, who is being entertained by somebody other than him. He's saying, you are playing the role of a prostitute. This is bad language for anybody, and God is in judgment of them. But none of us want to be in that position, do we? We don't want to be in a position where God is looking and saying, you're supposed to be faithful to me and to me only. How are you entertaining someone else? The person who is faithful to God, they're not entertaining anyone else. You're not entertaining any relationships with anyone else. And so he says, listen, y'all are caught up in this idolatry and you're caught up in witchcraft. And here's what I want you all to look at. We're going to look at Galatians chapter 5, verse 15, verse 19, I should say, through 21. Here's what he says. The acts of the sinful nature are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft. So I particularly, even though there is another verse in Micah 5 and 12, he talks about witchcraft, but I wanted us to look particularly at Galatians chapter 5 because Paul is writing in which testament? The New Testament. And so Paul is writing that even in the first century, when he wrote this letter to those who are at Galatia, that there was witchcraft. There's still people who walk around with pennies in their shoes. Y'all know I'm not lying. There are believers who read the horoscopes and believe that there's some belief to that stuff, right? There's still people who go to the palm reader. There's still people who are reaching out to the dead. That's witchcraft. And believers have no business in a seance or in any other thing that is considered witchcraft. You were going to say something. You need to come to a mic, though.
I was just going to ask, with the penny in the shoe, that's under your foot, right? Not like a penny loafer.
No, pennies in the shoe, right?
Okay.
Not a penny for decoration in the top of the shoe. I'm talking about yeah. And I've seen it. I just didn't know what I saw. I saw the person take the shoe off and had the pennies inside the shoe, and yeah, they had it as some type of thing of keeping spells off of you or something. Yeah. Good you never heard of it. Good you don't do it. But there are those folks who think that they can do that kind of stuff. He says there are, he says, witchcraft, hatred, discord. Now just look at this, because you would think Paul wouldn't be writing this to believers, right? Look at what he says. The acts of the sinful nature are sexual immorality. That word there is porneia. That is being fulfilled by anyone other than your spouse. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, and witchcraft, hatred. Hope we don't see none of that today. Discord, jealousy. We don't see that. Fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions. That's to be fractured. Factions might be added as cliques. And envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. And orgies is just what you think it means. Orgies. This is in the scriptures. And Paul is writing to the church to say, if y'all having orgies, threesomes, y'all are operating in the sinful nature. And the like. Notice this, he says, I warn you, as I did before, this ain't the first time I told you, as I did before, that those who live like this ain't got nothing to do with my kingdom. Those of y'all that's caught up in witchcraft, you can't be in my kingdom. So if you are part of organizations that's caught up in witchcraft, and you're part of witchcraft, here's what Paul says when he's talking to them about communion. He says, you cannot eat at the Lord's table and at other tables. You got to make up your mind, which one of these tables are you going to be at? Because that's to be a whore. Right? So the married person, I'm trying to give you, God is really plain in the language that he's using. The person who is married says at the altar, whether it's in front of the preacher or in front of the justice of the peace, I give me to you only. That's what they said. And when I turn around and give me to somebody other than you for the rest of my life, that's inappropriate. And God's saying that's what you do to me. When you're faithful to anybody other than me, it's idolatry. All right, let's jump. Now, I want us to look at this because he says in verse 5, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. And I don't know how we might feel about it, but when the Lord is against you, it ain't nothing like anybody else against you. When the Lord is with you, it ain't nothing that anybody can do to be against you. But on the other side, when the Lord is against you, I don't matter who with you. Right. That question of who you with, it don't matter. If the Lord ain't with you, it don't matter. Notice he says, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. Now, he's not saying it's just God against you. This is the Lord Almighty. This is, because you know God, whenever whatever name he uses, and there are hundreds of names that he uses, but when he switches from one name to the next one, there's some character, there's some quality about himself that he is elevating at that time. So this is not just Elohim that's against you. This ain't just El Shaddai. This is the Almighty. I'm against you. Yeah. Can you just imagine the punishment to hear that I'm the Almighty God and I'm against you? Who gonna help you? You remember when you saw your siblings about to get in trouble, you go, "Oh man, I don't." I mean, we brother and sister, but I don't have nothing to do with what's about to happen to you. Yeah. uh, so look, years ago, I'll never forget this. Years ago, um, Hazeman, our drummer, was his father was chastising them, and um, when his father turned to walk away, his older brother Markel was making faces at Hazeman, and so Hazeman was talking to his brother. But as his father had his back turned, walking away, and he heard what Hazeman said, he thought Hazeman was talking to him. And when he turned around, Markel saw the look on his face and said, "Dad, he wasn't talking to you. He was talking to me. He was talking to me." Because he's like, "I got to get between. You about to kill my brother." And I'll never forget that because Hazeman, he really wasn't talking to his father, but because his back was turned, he heard him talking smart and like, "Oh man, you about to get broke off real good." And his brother's like, "Man, let me get between you because I already see what's about to happen." When God is about to deal with you, there's nobody who can step in your place and defend. Look at this. Now, notice he gives them between verse 5 and 6 4 I wills. And when God says, "I'm going to do it," ain't no need in you wondering, is it going to happen? Can I tell y'all what Viola Johnson used to say? She said, "I don't promise beatings, I deliver." There's some mothers who tell you they're going to whip you tonight, and it's just a promise. My mama used to tell you, if I tell you, you can. It's a promise, buddy. Yeah, it's a promise. I don't promise beatings. I deliver. Look at this. He says, "I'm against you, and I will lift your skirts over your head." Here's what God is saying. Y'all have embarrassed a lot of people, but now it's my turn. I'm going to be the one that's embarrassing now. I hope you got on clean panties because I'm going to pull the skirt over your head. I'm a pull your skirts over your face. I'm in verse 5. He says, "I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness." Now, mind you, they ain't wear underwear back then. Yeah, if that skirt got lifted, you got exposed. Underwear is a recent invention. In biblical times, that's why in Galatians, when Paul tells them to put on the whole armor, he says, "Gird up your loins," because in those long flowing gowns that they wore, they were exposed underneath. If you're going to fight this fight, tie all that loose stuff up. But he's saying, "I'm gonna just lift your skirt, and I'm gonna show your nakedness, and the kingdom's your shame." What you've been doing to other people, making people shame, now I'm going to do it to you. He says, I will pelt you with filth and treat you with contempt. In verse 5, he says, and the kingdoms, I'm going to show the kingdoms your shame. In verse 6, he says, and make you a spectacle. I'm going to expose you. And when I'm done exposing you, everybody will be looking at you. But why is this happening to them? Because this is what they did. This is what they did to people. And so I think we need to be careful when we're the people who are doing, we're doing that to others. Like some of us, at times, because we're in places of leadership, we don't just handle things gracefully. Like, I'm going to do it and I'm going to embarrass you. And I do think that there are times when you have to deal with people the way they need to be dealt with. But to make it a pattern of embarrassing people on a regular basis, making people shame, right? You can do things privately and get things to be done effectively without blabbing and telling everybody how you had to do so and so, such and such to so and so. Yeah, Mom, if you move towards the mic, you can make your piece now. But there is a thing that we need to be thinking about, that it's not okay to just embarrass people for the fun of embarrassing people. Yeah.
Uh, Good evening, everyone. Uh, Especially like this book teaches us you don't mess with God people,
Right.
period.
Yeah.
Because they was messing with the God people
Yeah.
brutally. That's why God like bring into judgment like in front of everybody.
Yeah.
You really don't mess with God people.
Yeah. One time in 14 years as a pastor, um, I lost my cool, and the Spirit chastised me when I got home and said, "Don't you ever forget that those are my people. Don't you talk to my people like you did today." And I've had to come back before the congregation one time and apologize for the way I talked to them. They're my people. I don't mean everything is always sanitized and as squeaky clean as it can be, because I think that's the job of the preacher, is to confront, to chastise, to encourage, to exhort, to push. And sometimes you don't do that squeaky clean. You ain't always have your inside voice on. Because sometimes we don't respond to the inside voice. May I please? We don't always like I beg your pardon. Sometimes we don't like, yeah. Sometimes we don't respond to that, right? And but I do think that there is, it's, you don't want to be in that place of, as I said earlier, you don't want to be the bully, particularly when it comes to handling God's people. Look at verse 7. He says, and all who see you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is in ruins. Who will mourn for her? Where can I find anyone to comfort her? When God is done and they're in ruins, who's going to be sorry for you when they think about all the stuff that you've done to other people? Here's an example. It didn't even make it on the news. When Jeffrey Dahmer got killed, you think anybody was like, oh, that's a shame? And they went from, it's going to be 70 degrees in the afternoon and 59 at night. The news tonight is Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered in prison. John, what do you have? And it was on to the next story. And they didn't slow down at all. It was a story. They mentioned it and they kept right on going. Why? He was treacherous. We were earlier talking about the code, and from what I understand, I've never been even in handcuffs, but from what I understand, there are certain things that you don't want to come to prison and have it known that that's why you're there. Right? You're not looked at well for coming to prison for certain crimes. Yeah, yeah. There's certain crimes you don't want to have nothing to do with them crimes, or you come in the door saying, "Take me to protective custody." I'd rather be in a cell 23 hours a day where I know can't nobody get to me from the break, rather than, because there's nobody who has pity on folks who are being dealt with for a certain level of treachery. Look at verse 7 again. He says, and all who see you will flee from you. Ain't nobody going to be coming towards you after you've been a person who's treacherous. I mentioned Craig and Debo last week, but the movie is Friday, and Debo was the bully. But wasn't nobody mad when Craig got Debo? Yeah, Debo had been terrorizing the neighborhood for forever, and when he finally man, we tired of this. And that's how it is when you're that person. And I pray that I'm talking to folks who are saying, well, you ain't really talking to me because I'm not that bully. I'm not that person. That none of us are in that position. Whether I'm the parent, just because you're the parent and you got all the money and you pay all the bills and you make all the decisions don't mean you get to be the bully in the house. But for some of us, that's what happens. I'm a bully in my house. The children are scared and walk around on eggshells because daddy breaks stuff when he gets mad, and mama, and it's like, no, that's not it. Um, so um, let's look at verse. Um, yeah, what am I on there? Yeah. So I looked at 7, right? All right. So here's verse 8. Are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile, with water around her? These are all these places that are listed. Thebes, that's situated on the Nile, Cush and Egypt, Put and Libya, that are listed in verse 9. All of these are places that were places of strength that were overrun. And so what God is essentially saying to them is there something about you that makes you think that you're better than all these other places that had been fortresses, that had been strong towers, that were eventually overrun? He's essentially saying, you just like them. You haven't been destroyed yet, but what has happened to Thebes is getting ready to happen to you. What has happened to Put is getting ready to happen to you. What's happened to these other places is getting ready to happen to you. And sometimes what we do when we're in these places of affluence, we're in these places of being on top, we think that we're invincible. And God is helping them to say, there is nothing you can do to stop me, because I'm against you. I'm going back to verse 5. He says, I'm against you, and there is absolutely nothing you can do. All of the defense mechanisms you got, all the weapons you got, all the people you got, all the money and the resources you got, ain't none of that stuff going to do you no good when I come for you. You think you're all powerful. I'm going to show you what all powerful looks like. So he asked them, this is a rhetorical question. He says, are you better than Thebes? So what they did was they were next to the Nile River, And what they did was they put in all these canals with water. So you had to cross water, you had to have boats, and it was difficult for armies to attack thieves. But they did. And with all of that scheming and plotting and building it up the way they did, they still failed. He says, the river was her defense, the waters her wall. So you had to get through all of that water in order to get in. That's how D.C. was designed. So some of y'all don't know that, but that's why there's a Fort Tarleton and a Fort McNair and a Fort Stevens and a Fort Washington and Fort McNair. All these fort places were defense places all the way around the city. Now it's just a neighborhood, Fort Tarleton. But there really was a fort there. Fort Washington. There was a fort at Fort Washington. And so they built these strategic defenses all the way around the city, but it didn't work. They still came and burned the White House. So you can build all this stuff up thinking we're going to protect ourselves. And God is saying, doesn't matter what you got. So they did all this stuff with water, and it did not work. Look at verse 9. He says, Cush and in Egypt were her boundless strength. Put in Libya were among her allies. So these other folks were helping them, and yet it did not work. Cush is a territory in the north or the central part of Babylon, which would now be considered Ethiopia. The Nile is the longest river, one of the longest rivers in the world. The Amazon is actually the longest river. It's down in South America. But it flows 4,100 miles through Sudan, out of Sudan into Egypt, and from Egypt into the Mediterranean Sea. It's a long river. Lots of people are able to live because of the Nile River. And so he goes through just talking about how they think they got it going on. But you and I need to be careful. Whenever we begin to think that we're at a place of invincibility, that's probably where we're going to actually fall. And here's what I've come to believe and why I try to be clean. Now, I'm very high in wanting to do things right. Integrity is high on my list. One of those is I don't want to be uncovered by God for doing things wrong. So very early in my young Christian walk, here's what I discovered. That the thing that I think I'm going to hide from God is the very thing that God is going to come and pull the cover back and expose. You're going to have junk on your phone, and on one day, I'm going to show somebody that junk you got on your phone. You might get away with it for 5, 10, 15 years, but keep playing around, and I'm going to uncover that junk on your phone. You got all that history in your computer, I'm going to, you don't know the day it's going to happen, but I promise you, and that's just this conviction I have in my heart. Don't fool around with the dumb stuff, because at some point, you're going to be uncovered. That's my conviction. Stay right, then you ain't got to worry about being uncovered. You don't have all this dumb stuff in your background. You don't have all this stupid stuff in your history. You don't have to worry about being uncovered. Let me look at your phone here. Let me go back and look through your computer history. Go ahead. And it ain't because I got an incognito screen. Yeah. Muhammad, you want to come to the mic? Or was that E? Which? Yeah, I think it was.
You just said it like you feel like invisible. Right after I saved, I felt it that way. God humbled me. Like I was like, I thought I got my certificate for the heaven. I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And like, thank God, God didn't let me go too farther. He humbled me right away.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely believe this is so powerful. My professor, Glenn Kreider, he said you know a person understands grace by how graceful they are. When you don't have any grace, you don't understand grace. There's no way you can appreciate the gracefulness of God, particularly when that gracefulness is extended toward you and you can't find no way to be graceful. Um, so, what did I? Okay, so I was at 9. Let's jump to verse 10. Uh, Here's what he says. Yet she was taken captive and went into exile. So here they have Thebes with all this security, and yet was taken captive and taken into exile. And her infants were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. Lots were cast for her nobles, and all her great men were put in chains. So not only were they captured, their babies were killed. And here's what he's saying. Not only were the babies killed, they went to every major intersection, and that's where they killed the babies. So all of them who were being taken captive had to see their babies and their next generation being slaughtered as they were being led off into captivity. That's how cruel the Assyrians were. These were some treacherous folks, and God is saying, y'all about to get it. Yeah, y'all about to get it too. Go ahead and do all that stuff that you've already done it. But the same thing that you've done, that's what's going to be lobbied back to you. Her infants were dashed to pieces right at the head of every street. And great men were put in chains. High number of the men were put in chains. That means they were taken off to captivity. Now, look at this. I want you to look at Hosea 13:16. I want you to look at the last half of this verse. He says, the people of Samaria must bear their guilt because they have rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to the ground. And notice this, how violent they are. Their pregnant women ripped open. These are violent people. And God is saying, all that stuff that y'all did, I'm against you now. Now, let me just tell you this, because some folks don't like me talking about abortion. It's my body, I can do what I want. That ain't what the scriptures say. It's my body. Which I find to be ludicrous in the first place, because if it's your body and you get to choose what you want, why are we so mad when the mother smokes or does drugs the entire time and then the baby comes out addicted or comes out with some type of deformity? Why are we mad? It's her body, right? So if it's your body, you get to do what you want. Why are we mad when the baby's born with all the ramifications, all the complications of the mother doing to her body what she wanted to do? So you can't have it both ways. It can't be your body and you get to do what you want. But then when you do whatever you want, now we turn around and say, well, she was trifling. That don't go together. Right? So it's not her body. This is another body growing inside of your body. Which another part of the hypocrisy is somebody does something to you while you're pregnant and you lose the baby, they're going to get charged for murder. But if we're denying that it's something alive, you understand, it's all these layers of this is hypocrisy. But anyway, God has a problem with them, and he makes it clear that he has a major problem with them for the way that they have been doing things, right? So I want to jump because we got a little bit of time, and we got about another 8 verses to go. So um, he says she was taken captive, infants dashed to pieces, and he says in verse 11, you too will become drunk, and you will go into hiding and seek refuge from the enemy. You're going to be at this place where you are. So you've put all these other people into hiding. You put all these other people in the place where they needed refuge, and now that's going to be you. Now, in verse 12, he says about them, I think I don't see 12. Do I have 12 up there? No. Okay. Looks like maybe I don't have 12 in there. Okay, maybe I don't have 12. All right, we'll skip over that. This is no, I mean I have it here. All your fortresses are like fig trees, um, and with their all your fortresses are like fig trees, and with their first ripe fruit, they are shaken, and the figs fall into the mouth of the eater. So here's the analogy. It's a simile that he used. He says it's like. So once the fig tree was ripe for the figs, you could walk to the fig tree and shake the fig tree with little effort. The figs would fall to the ground. He's saying that's just like y'all are. It ain't gonna take a whole lot of effort to run you over. Y'all know how you go shake the fig tree and the figs just fall off? That's y'all. I'm not gonna put a whole lot of effort to you because y'all are ripe for the plucking. Um, in let me go back. So in verse 13, he says, "Look at your troops. They are all like women. The gates of your land are wide open to your enemies. Fire has consumed their bars." So he's saying, y'all got soldiers, but they scared as women. Now I said he couldn't have written this today because you'd have some feminists who'd be mad, like, why they gotta be women? Oh wow. Your troops are like women. Now, mind you, their imagery are lions. The Assyrians are known for the having lions as the statues and stuff like that. You see, y'all, you ain't looking like lions when the Almighty shows up. Yeah, the tables turn, and when the tables do turn, you need to be at a place of being ready. So he says, and then when they invaded the city, because they came through the defenses of the water, which is how they got in, and then they burned all the gates to the city. So notice in verse 13, he says, and the gates of your land are wide open to your enemies. Fire has consumed their bars. So not only, you remember when Nehemiah's time was torn down, the first thing they did was burn the gates to the city, right? Because that leaves you defenseless. Imagine these large walled cities, and they've got these huge gates to control people coming out. But now you have a town where the gates have been burned down. So you got a town, but you can't stop anybody from coming in and out. Can you imagine how violated that feels? You have no defense mechanisms? Yeah. All right, look at 14. He says, draw water for the siege. Now, these, make a note here that as you work your way through 14 and 15, he's given them imperatives, but there's a high level of sarcasm in this. He's being sarcastic with them because he's saying, draw water for the siege, strengthen your defenses. The Almighty's coming, but y'all need, go ahead and get your stuff together. It ain't nothing you can do. But it's almost a sense of toying with them. Like he's trifling with them. Yeah, go ahead, get you some water. Because if you knew that someone was coming to war against you, you needed drinking water. So you would stockpile drinking water because you're getting ready to do what? Close the walls to the city and cover the gates and all that so that people can't get in. But if you had to go outside the gate to get water, you needed to bring water in. He's saying, get your water. Go ahead, get your water. Yeah. Get your water. He's saying, go ahead and strengthen your defenses. Get your Uzis and your Glocks and get your street sweepers and get your late grenade. Stack your stuff up. Work the clay. Tread out the mortar. Repair the brickwork. You got some weak places in your wall. Go ahead and fix the walls. Yeah, he says, their fire will devour you. There the fire will devour you. The sword will cut you down. And like grasshoppers, consume you. Multiply like grasshoppers. Multiply like locusts. Here's what he's saying to them. When we start coming for you, there is nothing that y'all are going to be able to do. You getting what I'm saying? Because this coming for you, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So I was kind of puzzled and looking at this like, why is he mocking them like this? Why is he making so much fun of them? It's like, I'm going to do to you what I got to do, but I'm also using the prophet. Kind of Joan on you a little bit. Like, y'all go ahead. Do all that stuff. He says, there the fire will devour you. And grasshoppers will consume you. Grasshoppers are known to be destructive. They can wipe out miles and miles of fields in no time. Locusts, the same thing. Crop can be there, look good, and grasshoppers show up, and it is wiped out. Locusts show up, and it is wiped out. Look at verse 16. Because really what he's saying to them is that the armies are going to be as destructive towards you as grasshoppers and locusts would be. They're going to wipe y'all out. In 16, he says, you have increased the number of your merchants till they are more than the stars of the sky. But like the locusts, they strip the land and then fly away. Your guards are like locusts, your officials like swarms of locusts that settle in the walls on a cold day, but when the sun appears, they fly away and no one knows where. So here's what they would do. Here's how they built their strength up. They would go into a place and then rob the places of everything that they had. All their strength was gone. You know who else was guilty of that? The U.S. I was told to watch this movie. There's a rapper named Rick Ross. But there's a real guy who was named Rick Ross out in Los Angeles. Rick Ross, so locally, we had a guy named Rayful Edmonds. Rick Ross was way bigger than Rayful Edmonds. And I finally sat down one day. They called him Freeway Rick Ross. He recently got out of prison, sued the rapper for his name, lost. So the rapper is running around calling himself Rick Ross, but there really was a guy named Rick Ross out in California. No, the rapper's name is not Rick Ross. He just borrowed his name. Yeah. Um, yeah. So, but the real Rick Ross was selling crack cocaine in Los Angeles. And the movie is about how the Reagan administration sold crack cocaine in the black community, and the money that they made from funneling crack into the black community through Freeway Rick Ross decimated the black community. And while I'm watching the movie, it dawns on me how destructive they had been. So not only did they decimate our community by flooding it with crack cocaine, they also sapped all the money out of our community and then funded a war down in Nicaragua. So you have a war in another country, you kill the black people, and you take their money at the same time. So much money was coming out of the black community that you're fighting a war in another country. And God don't have a problem with that? The amount of hatred that has been put on us in this country is ridiculous. So you decide that you're going to just rob our community. And we ain't got no money as it is. So you put this poison in our neighborhood and suck like a vacuum, hook the money up to our community and just vacuum all the money out of our community, so much so that you can fight a war. And decimated our communities. And now, here's the thing, while we're going to jail for what we did, now that it's an epidemic in suburbia, now we want treatment. It wasn't no treatment in the 80s. It wasn't no treatment in the 90s. It was mandatory minimums. You got caught with how much? Go to jail for 15 years. How much you had? Go to jail for 20 years. How much? Go to real jail for the rest of your life. Now, Becky needs treatment. Billy Joe should be, sent in to get, yeah. Look at this. He talks about locusts in verse 16. He talks about locusts in 15, locusts in 16, and locusts again in 17. Your guards are like locusts and your officials. All right. Now, so there is this destruction that they did by running people over, and part of them building themselves up was also taking people's wealth. And God is saying to them, all that wealth that you have accumulated, when the Medes come in to run y'all over with, they're going to take it all from you. Now notice this, where Nineveh is, never became a town again. When God says, I'm going to destroy you because I'm against you, he does. All right. Look at verse 18 and 19, and we'll be moving on to one more piece. He says, O king of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your nobles lie down to rest, your people are scattered on the mountains, and no one to gather them. Nothing can heal your wound. Your injury is fatal. Everyone who hears the news about you claps his hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty? There is no one who feels sorry for you, because everyone has been affected by your cruelty. Now, there are really folks in our country who wonder why we don't have a whole lot of loyalty to this country. Because there are none of us who can say, I haven't felt the sting of what y'all do to our people. I was with a young man, um, and he started telling me about how he was experiencing racism, and then he wanted to tell me why he knew it was racism. And I said, "You ain't got to tell me that, because everything in you knows when you have experienced racism, and you don't even need to tell me why you knew it was, right? You've been around it long enough that you know when you see it, and when you're experiencing it. You don't have to explain it to me." So that's where they are, and they have been cruel, and they have caused people to have so much death that that's what's going to come to them. And um, here's the part that I think is just bad, that people rejoice at their death. You would think people would mourn when you die, but you've been so bad that people are actually clapping that you're dead. Now, let's deal with this, and then we're going to jump to our questions. How is it that Christians feel when there's a non believer who comes to their demise? Are we, are we sad? Do we mourn? How do we feel when a person who's a non believer, you have to get to a mic, a person who's a non believer is coming to their demise at the end?
You kind of feel. You feel for them, and then you also feel that you have reflection of that, probably when you were blind and didn't see. And you want that person to see so much that you kind of feel for them, especially you kind of get a feel like you can't keep living like that because that's going to come back on you.
Right.
You want them to see, you know, but with the rage or the hurt or the anger that they just can't get past, you really feel for them.
Right, but I'm at a place where I'm saying they're dead now.
You really feel, but yeah. And if it's someone that you really care about, love, and you just wanna, but they just so, you know, it's like the more you try to reach, the more they try to push away.
Right.
It's too late, like you said.
Yeah. So I think on the hand where the person has just been cruel and they die, is like there are times when you see people going, "I'm glad," right? I don't know that there was anybody who was sad when the news broke, we got bin Laden. We've been looking for him for a long time, right? Bush, with his tight lips, said, "We will hunt you down." Obama did it and then told them, "Don't blow the house up. Go get him. We don't want any conspiracy theories that he lived. I want the body. Bring the body out the house." Right? So people weren't like, "Oh man, they should have just locked him up. They could have captured him alive." Ain't nobody feel like that. But how do we justify that, or how do we deal with that when we look at the person and go, "But they didn't know Jesus. They died, but they didn't know Jesus."
I felt that's what happened with my father when he passed. I really mourned his death because he didn't know. And, you know, I had tried a couple of times to talk to him. He didn't want to had nothing to do with it. And then he died out in the street. But I really mourned his death because it's definitely a different kind of feel when someone close to you dies and you know they don't know you. So there's no eternal life for them.
Right, right. All right, let's jump to, we have a few questions to kind of work our way through. When you think about the amount of genocide that's happened in the United States of America, what is the appropriate reaction of God considering God's response against the Assyrians? So think about how God has dealt with the Assyrians, the way they killed people, and then think about the amount of killing that happens in our country. So, how should God respond? Now, mind you, this country is built on 400 years of cruelty towards people, right? We have Native Americans here that we filled up with smallpox blankets, just gave them blankets, and then watched them walk off with the blankets, knowing they had smallpox. We had men in this country that we didn't give them syphilis, but we told them we were treating the syphilis that we knew they had, but didn't, and watched them just to see what the syphilis was going to do. So we spread stuff saying they gave them syphilis. They didn't give it to them. They just told them they were going to treat it, but they didn't. And then watch them to see what would the syphilis do to them. And who did they do that to? Us. But you decimate the Native American population, right? You treat Asians from China and Japan, you treat them horribly when they get to this country, so that they're in concentration camps and all of that kind of stuff. Even right now in our country, Jewish people are treated rottenly, right? There's assaults up in New York and different parts of the world, in different parts of the country against Asians, right? So I'm now asking, what is the proper response of God against the people? If he got all these problems with the Assyrians, does he have any problem with these people? Yeah, I think he does.
That kind of take me back to the young lady from the WNBA who went over and with that whole situation.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of. I feel like they wanted to make a point.
Mm-hmm.
That's
They
all
are.
that was.
Yeah.
It wasn't even about because what it was for the little bit of whatever it was. You didn't have to give it that, but they wanted to make a point to America.
Well, it's also known that they don't just do that to Americans, they do that to anybody they catch with it. So they just figured we're Americans, y'all gonna give us a break, right? And like, nope. What does Nahum teach us about building empires on impropriety, as the Assyrians did? What does this book teach us about building your empire, doing it the wrong way? You are. You might be getting a by, but you ain't getting away, right? I just read today that the Washington football team owner is filing to sell it. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, but apparently he's been doing a whole bunch of dumb stuff behind the scenes and undercover and all of that. And I think he bought it for 800 million, and it's worth billions or something now. So he gonna get paid 6 billion. He gonna get paid. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. His great grandchildren will never work with the amount of money he about to get from the sale of that team. Um, how do you propose to help someone whom God says He is against? You can pray that He have mercy. Yeah, I'm against you, and I don't know what to do. Right, I don't know what to do to help you. Um, how do you reconcile that God is the God of salvation? He is the God of sovereignty. How do you reconcile that God let there be so much money and so much poverty at the same time? Like there are people who are living in houses that are 20,000 square foot houses, 12 bathrooms. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely think that there is a point where I don't know how we're going to justify the stuff that we do, you know. And I'll never forget. There's a huge plumbing contractor out in Los Angeles. Guy's name is Mike Diamond, and I talked to Mike, and he said I wouldn't grow my company past 8 trucks. If I were you, you're talking to me about advice on what to do. Now, mind you, at that point, he's probably got over 100 employees, but he's telling me I wouldn't grow over 8. Now, he said because after a while it's just ego, and you're just going after more because you can. But yeah, he's saying if I were you, and I'm not you, but if I were you, I wouldn't do what I did because I just grew it and grew it and grew it, and I got all these employees, and we're in 3 different counties in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, but don't do what I did. He said if you make it up to $250,000 a year, that's enough money. But he's saying I make way more than that, but it's a headache. Don't do what I did. And I think in our country, we are so busy just getting more and more and more, and we never stop to say, how can we have so much wealth and so much poverty? So I don't have the answer to that, but that's just something I want you to think about. How do you do that? Alan, you want to say something?
Uh, I was kind of, but kind of piggybacking off
Pull
what
the mic up closer.
kind of piggybacking off what she said. Like even God uses everyone. Even if someone is doing or saying and they're against you and you're trying to show, I think to how God uses that, He still, like she said, we have to love. So even if they said bad or whatever, through God, through us, say, hey, even though they did this and said that or whatever to you, you still have to love them. And that's just the way that it kind of shows God love and say, hey, even though despite you said this to me or about me or did this, I'm still going to show love.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Here's the last thing I want to ask. Um, God was displeased with the Assyrians in Nineveh. This I want you to wrestle with personally. How might God be displeased with your life? Because he was displeased with the Assyrians, right? And he comes through and he tells them, y'all brace yourself because I'm about to deal with you. Go ahead and get your water and patch your walls up and fix your mortar pans and all that because I'm coming. But what about us? Because I noticed that I don't feel as bad about God dealing with other folks as I do him dealing with me. Yeah, you know that I don't. Um, and sometimes Trina Williams said this. She said, um, "Folks have 20/20 vision when it comes to seeing sin in other people's lives. They got cataracts when it comes to seeing sin in their own life. Like they got LASIK surgery. When looking at you, like I can see clearly. It come to my life though, I can't see nothing. Yeah,
Big rig, I be wanting to curse people out. And I have to pray, Lord, please help me to refrain myself because
Yeah,
I'm trying
yeah,
to do the
yeah,
right thing.
yeah, 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 yeah. Muhammad?
Actually, like, we have tendency to answer like churchy way. God wants us to be authenticity. Like, I was reading Genesis about Lot. He chose to be where he was like sinner, but God is so merciful. It's not about us like what we trying to do. It's all about the Lord. What He's merciful is teaching me like just be you. Is Lord came down to earth to die for us, but just the way we are.
Yeah,
So be authenticity. We don't have to say the right thing.
right.
God, God knows He's the one who can change everything. He's so faithful.
Yeah,
I just want to put it out there.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. All right. There's a paragraph that I want you all to just kind of work your way through. There's one other thing that's there, and hopefully you all have an opportunity to kind of work your way through it. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this time together, and we thank you, oh God, for the book of Nahum. We're grateful, God, for seeing that um, you give prophecy and your word is true. Nahum uh, prophesied to the people of Nineveh, the Assyrians, and everything that you used Nahum to say to the Assyrians came to pass. And so, God, we're mindful of your word and that your word is applicable to us as your people, and that we too should not be treacherous. We too should not be advantage takers. We too, God, should not get ahead through mashing down on your people. And so, God, where there's anything in us that is like the Assyrians, anything in us, oh God, that is like the people of Nineveh, Lord, that you would do surgery on us, that you would work on our hearts, that you would work on our minds, God, that you would give us a new spirit, that you would give us a contrite heart, Lord, that you would, as David said, Lord, give me a contrite heart, Lord. And we know that you won't despise a contrite heart, Lord. Um, so I pray your blessing over your people, those who are online, those who have journeyed to be here in the building with us tonight. I pray your blessing over your people. And we thank you for it even right now in the name of the Lord Jesus. And all of us who love the Lord said, amen. I like that book.